This is Bernice Jackson, September the 12th, 1984, at the museum interviewing Grace Hunter Adams. Grace, let's first talk about your grandparents. On your mother's side, let's start with those.
All right.
Where did they come from, and where did they settle, and why did they come
Okay.
to this country?
My mother's parents had lived in Massachusetts for many years. Ancestry goes back to Revolutionary War times. My grandmother's name was Marston, and her father was a Baptist preacher. He came west because, the preachers thought it was kind of a missionary zeal to go west with the new country being opened. So he left Massachusetts and came to Missouri. And he became a leader in the Baptist church and was sent to Oklahoma, to Indian Territory, as an agent. Well, he first came as a missionary to that area, but I think it was fairly common that the government would name a missionary or a church leader to be an agent for the 5 civilized tribes. I understand it this way anyway. So he was named Indian agent, and they lived at Muskogee at, what is now the 5 Civilized Tribes Museum.
Yes.
And he was Indian agent there for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandmother was not there at the agency very much because she had been married before he came. She had married a man by the name of Camel, and by him she had 3 children, 2 girls and a boy. 1 girl died. But they were divorced, which was kind of unusual in those days. And then my grandmother married Thomas Bruce McCarg, who is my grandfather. Grandmother McCarg and grandfather were married in Boonville, Missouri, and they lived there until after my mother was born. My mother was born in 1877 in Boonville. And I don't know at what age they left Boonville. Now, are you interested in the names of all of that family, or just my mother?
Yes, your mother.
Okay. I don't know how old she was when they moved from there to Hugoton, Kansas.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't stay there very long, and they moved to Belle Plaine, Kansas. And I think it must have been the teen years that the family lived at Belle Plaine. From there, then they went down into Beaver
County.
City.
Beaver City.
They called it Beaver City then.
What year was that when they arrived in Beaver City? Do you remember?
I really don't know. I know that my mother was married at the age of 17. And
the first time?
Well, my mother was only married once. It was my grandmother.
It was your grandmother, yes.
Right. So I'm assuming that they came into Beaver County when she was about 12 or 13.
Mm-hmm.
But I really don't know that.
Yes. Do you remember any stories as she told you about Beaver and Beaver County as you grew up?
Well, let me think.
Who was her friends? And
all right, the Quinns were friends of hers. Maud Thomas was a good friend of my mother's. In fact, I can remember one time, I don't know how much I should diverse from this, but I can remember one time when I was in high school and Maud Thomas was coming to Woodward for General Federated Clubs. She was, and she and Mrs. Quinn, and I can't think of her first name. But anyway, they came and stayed with us.
Mm-hmm.
But really, I don't remember a whole lot of incidents. I do remember names. Doc Tracy and, like I say, the Queens, the Loughboroughs.
Yes.
I can remember hearing them talk about these people.
Yes.
But as far as actual incidents go, I really don't.
Did you go to school in Beaver?
I didn't.
You
See,
didn't.
it was my mother.
Or was your mother that went to school in
Yes.
Beaver?
I know she went to normal school in Beaver.
Mm-hmm. That would have to be about 1910 and 12, wouldn't it? Somewhere along in there?
No, because she was married in 1896.
Oh, she was.
Uh-huh.
And they had a normal school before she was married.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, I know that they did have a normal school later on then for teachers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, now, I think, this, well, I don't know that. It may be a later photo that I have that I know is a normal school. But it would have had to have been before 1900, even so.
Yes.
Because I think that the Hutters and the McCargs both moved to Woodward.
What church did they go to?
The Hutters, I think, I'm not sure about this, but I think they helped start the Presbyterian Church at Beaver.
I see.
They were active in the Presbyterian Church there.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that they helped organize the one in Woodward,
Yes.
but they did go to the Presbyterian Church.
Mm-hmm.
My mother's people, the McCargs, I think also went to the Presbyterian Church. They were Baptist.
Did they know Reverend Overstreet?
Yes, I've heard them talk of the Overstreets.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Can she remember how the town of Beaver looked and told you about it?
Well, if she did, I really don't remember. I can remember them talking about that there being a path worn between where the Hunters lived and the McCargs because they visited back and forth.
Yes.
They were good friends. And
Mm-hmm.
my father was 9 years older than my mother.
Were there very many sod houses standing at that time?
I don't know that.
You don't remember whether she told you?
No, I don't think they lived in the sod house. I don't remember her saying that they did.
Okay, and where did they go from there?
They moved to Woodward.
And what year do you know when they moved to Woodward?
I think it was 1893. I'm pretty sure it was.
When they moved to Woodward.
Mm-hmm.
Now then, we have those grandparents pretty well located. Let's go
Okay.
to the other side.
All right. My father's father, whose name was Joseph Hunter, was born in Edinburgh in 1834.
Born where?
In Edinburgh, Scotland.
Okay.
And my grandmother, whose name was also Hunter, was born in Milford, Ireland, because I'm reading now from the history.
Okay, that's fine.
Her forebears had left Scotland at the time of the Reformation, but returned to Edinburgh when she was 13.
Mm-hmm.
And she was a cousin of Joseph Hunter, and they fell in love, but both sets of parents were so opposed to this marriage. And Joseph Hunter was the first to come to the United States. He settled in Illinois. Then Martha Hunter came later, and exactly how she did that, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But she came later, and they were married. And this is where my father was born, was Pittsfield, Illinois.
Well, that's where my father was born.
Is it really? What was his name?
Lloyd.
Now, I have a Pittsfield County history, maybe you do too.
Oh, no, I don't. I'd love to see it.
Well, I'll bring it up here sometime
Good.
and leave it for you.
And then your father, where did he meet your mother then?
At Beaver.
At Beaver.
Mm-hmm.
How come he to migrate to Beaver?
Well, they first came from Illinois to Newkirk, Oklahoma. No, is that Newkirk, Kansas? Not Newkirk. Caldwell, Kansas.
Caldwell, Kansas.
Caldwell. And I really don't know why they left there, but they left there and went to Beaver at the time of, now when was that land opened?
Well, there were Sooners in there, you know, a long time before it was open. It never was declared open for settlement.
Oh, is that right?
Till in 1900, and then it became known as Beaver County. The whole
the whole Panhandle area.
Panhandle became known as Beaver County.
Okay, I find this here.
Okay.
That they left. Let's see. The family came in 1886 to Beaver after living for a year in Caldwell.
Mm-hmm.
So they were probably what you would be calling Sooners.
Well, you know what Sooners mean.
Yes,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. My grandfather was a bootmaker, and he had a shop in Beaver.
Oh, he did?
Uh-huh. A Hunter boot
And
shop.
what was the name of the
Hunter, I think it was just called Hunter boot shop.
And it was located where? On Main or Douglas?
You know, I don't know. I don't. I have a picture of it at home.
Good.
I could bring that sometime too. And
I'd love to have a copy made for the museum at Beaver.
okay. Then he, when they came to Woodward, and I'm pretty sure it was 1893 that they came to Woodward. And my parents, well, no, it wouldn't have been either, because my parents were married in 1896. And I don't think they had lived here 3 years. Well, anyway, I do know they were married here.
In Woodward.
In 1896.
Yes.
And the house where they were married still stands.
Oh, is that right? Here
Yeah.
in the city?
Well, it's 8th in Oklahoma. And the house at the time that my grandmother lived in it was on the corner, catty corner across from the Christian church.
I see.
When I was in high school in the 20s. And why they did this, I don't know. They moved that house to the east and built another little house right there on the corner.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's, if you remember, that's Marilyn's shop where she has all the brass and...
Oh, yes.
Okay. She connected those two houses, the one where my grandmother lived and the new house that was built in the 20s. She connected those. It's all one building along there now, you know.
Yes.
But that house, and I love to go in there. I like her shop, but also I like to walk in there and those boards creak in that floor, and I think, well, you know, my mother stood here.
Yes. Yes, you're walking where your mother walked. Well, can you remember, what did you do when you were a child? Do you remember your early childhood and for entertainment or?
Well, yes, I do, because I had a sister who was 15 years older than I. Then I had 4 brothers, and I was the youngest one then. So by the time I was up and could remember a whole lot, my sister was gone, away from home.
Yes.
And I mostly played with my brothers or by myself.
Yes.
And yes, I can remember that in the summertime we had an orchard, And the trees, I don't know how far apart they were, but of course it was planted in rows and
Yes.
squares, and so I would in the spring when it was warm enough to play out, I'd take twigs and I had 4 rooms of the living room and the dining room and the kitchen and the bedroom. I'd take sticks and I'd put those in the ground to make, you know,
Yes.
to separate these.
Yes.
And
That was your playhouse.
that was my playhouse, and
Yes.
I played, you know.
Do you remember who your first teacher was?
Yes, I do. Her name was Zelma Knight.
Mm-hmm.
She still lives. She's
Wow.
living at Moreland.
Uh-huh.
And I started school in 1918,
Yes.
which was, you know, the war was going on. And she was awfully young, and I don't remember much about that first
Did your
school year.
father have to go to war?
No. I've never had a father, a brother, a son, a husband in war.
In any of the wars.
Any of the wars.
How lucky you were.
Is that right? Really?
Well, did you have, or did your mother take part in the Red Cross work?
Yes, she did.
Tell me about it. What
Well,
did they do?
in the First World War, I can remember seeing her knit those khaki things, you know. It seems like, didn't they wear some things they call wristlets?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I remembered. I can remember her knitting those and other things, but I don't really remember. I just remember the wristlets particularly. Then in the Second World War, my mother helped at the Red Cross, you know, but in the First World War, of course, she was still busy with family at home.
Yes.
But Mother was active. She and an aunt of mine, Grace Russell, and a good friend of my mother's, Zella Patrick, were really instrumental in organizing the first country women's club in Woodward County.
Oh.
And they called it the Social Hour Club.
Mm-hmm.
And in the beginning it was just, you know, for their own pleasure and edification, because they studied, you know, they had lessons and they'd prepare papers and this sort of thing. But then later they federated with the home demonstration clubs.
Yes.
And then later they withdrew from that, and it was just a social club again, and then it just kind of died away. But she was very active at one point in home demonstration.
And what were you doing at this time?
Well, I was in 4-H.
You were in 4-H. Well, during the World War II, did the young girls help out in making Red Cross things and work with the women?
I suppose I didn't. I was living at Sharon at that time, and pretty busy with my own family.
You were married at that time?
Yes, during World War II.
And tell us the name of your husband and spell his name.
Okay. My husband is Russell, Russell, and we're real picky about having that last L on there. Russell Adams, and Adams. He was born south of Tangier, about 6 miles.
Was he a relative to the people that had the Adams store
Yes,
in Woodward?
Did
he ever work with them?
He worked there for 7 years in Adams, and I believe it was the last 3 of those years he worked in the meat market, was a butcher.
Well, what relation were they to him?
Adams brothers were Roy Adams and Luther Adams.
Yes.
They were his father's brothers, so
see.
they were his uncles.
Are they either one living?
No.
And after that, where did they move to?
Well, when we were first married, we moved. My mother, by the time we were married, was a widow, and she traveled a lot, and so we just moved in with her
Mm-hmm.
and lived on our home place, which is 2 miles east of Woodward. We lived there for we lived there 4 years. That's where our oldest 2 children were born.
And did he farm the place?
No, he worked in Woodward all that time.
Oh, he did.
Hmm. Worked at the store.
And
My brother farmed the place.
I see.
Hmm.
And you didn't have to help with the process of making the farm productive.
Well,
Your brother.
Yes, that's right. No, I didn't.
Did you raise chickens or anything like that on the
Well,
farm?
we did. We did raise some chickens.
And
But
did,
as far as the farm work, actual farming
Yes.
the land, we didn't.
and did you have a cow to milk?
No,
No.
not until we left there. When we left there, then my husband decided that store life wasn't exactly for him, and
Mm-hmm.
so he decided to farm. We left here and moved out near where he was born.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
And that was at
that was in 1937.
1937.
Mhm.
Okay, you were living here then during here on close to Woodward during the Depression days.
Yes.
Did that affect your store, the Adams stores?
Yes, it did. Because I've heard Russell tell about people were just, a lot of them just destitute. And at one time they had a little, I don't know what to call it, a settlement, but it was just a group of people living down on the river, and they called it the Hoover Hotel. And I've heard him tell several times that his Uncle Roy said, now, if those fellows, anybody comes in here to the store and tries to take food, just stand back and let them. Don't
Mm-hmm.
don't argue with them. Just try and keep track of what they took. But it never did develop.
Well,
But I've also heard Russell tell that when the First National Bank went broke, which was, I think, in the 30s. I think in 1930.
yes.
I'm not sure about that exactly, but he was working at the store, and he said he remembered going out in the street the morning that the bank was closed, and there were people lined up as far as what's now the J.C. Penney, waiting till they could get in and find out something about what was going on.
And that would be how many blocks?
Well, it's just about a half a block.
Half a block.
Mm-hmm. But that's quite a few people.
Were the people more or less in a panic over that bank closing?
I don't know that they were panicked as much as they were just depressed.
Concerned.
Mm-hmm. I don't remember him saying that there was any.
Any panic? Or,
Yeah.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Did the other banks stay open then?
The way I remember it, they did.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the Gerlach Bank had closed much earlier than that. It closed when my father was still living. He died in 29.
Which bank?
Gerlach.
Gerlach.
Mm-hmm.
Where was it located?
Where Getzingers are.
Oh,
Because my father had money in that bank, and I can remember that was kind of a bad time for us.
yes. And did you get a portion of it back?
Yes, he did. I don't remember what part. But I don't know. It seemed that my parents were always in debt, which I guess wasn't unusual in those days.
No. There was a joke about borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. I can remember that with my folks. Well, Then Roosevelt came across with this WPA and the CCCs. Can you tell me how that affected Woodward? Did it help the Woodward populace?
Russell says, and I've heard him say it many times, that if it hadn't been for WPA, he didn't know what would have happened to a lot of those people. Because
what kind of work did they do here?
Well, they did road work mostly. And they did, well, that's road work. There's some stone work on the 8th Street Road going east, south out of Woodward. It's, you know, protecting the ditches from washing completely away.
Yes.
And that was done by WPA. It's still there, and it still serves good purpose.
And did you know any of the boys that had to go or went to the CCC camps?
You know, I don't, but my brother was the architect out there.
Oh.
My brother, Harold, had been living in Oklahoma City and moved out here, and he designed the bathhouse at Bowling Springs. And worked there for, I don't know, after that bathhouse was built, he still worked out there, and exactly what he did.
Well, wasn't it the CC boys that built the
Yes, it was.
that whole
Yes.
park?
The whole park. It was.
You know, I think that was marvelous because those boys, if they hadn't have had those jobs, what would have become of them?
And of their families.
Yes, and their families, yes.
Because when they had a reunion a while back, I remember one of the fellows saying that he sent his money home. They weren't paid much, but they were paid a little. And he sent most of his money home to his parents.
Yes. And they fed them and furnished them a place to sleep, but did they furnish their clothes?
I don't know.
I don't know either.
I sure don't.
Well, let's go on to the dust storm days.
Okay.
Those
shall we, or shall we forget them?
We'd like to forget them, wouldn't we? But that's part of history.
Yes, it is. It is. And it's hard to try and tell anyone what it was like.
You nearly had to live through them, didn't you?
I think so.
Well, try to tell me in your own words and how it affected your family life.
We, at the height of the dust storms, we had by then moved to Sharon. And I can remember the house where we lived was a fairly good house, although it was old. But we did not have any carpeting on the bedroom floors. And I can remember several times waking up in the morning and on the floor would be sand enough that it was there in little tiny drifts. You've probably seen that.
Yes, I saw that.
And
would your pillow be covered with dust?
Yes.
Except where your head lay.
That's right. That's right. It didn't seem to affect us health-wise, but I think that farther west, the way I understand it, we escaped the worst. It was much worse farther west
yes,
than it was.
It was. It was.
But it was...
well, the wind would blow one day from the west, from the south, next from the north.
That's right.
Did you have any trouble holding the soil on your fields?
Yes, we did. My goodness, I can remember Russell going out time after time to mark up, as he called it, the land to help keep it from this.
What kind of implement did he use to do that? Do you remember?
You know, I can't tell you. It seemed like
disc or...
Well, no, I don't think it was a disc. I thought it was a little kind of a shovel tooth implement that made little just little
furls.
furrows. Mm-hmm.
And he would go crossways of what the wind
Yes.
would be blowing.
Yes, so that some of that dirt would fall into those furrows.
Yes, and then he'd turn and come back, and
Yes, the way I remember it, he would make maybe a couple like up and then back, and then he'd skip a little ways.
yes,
And do that again.
and he would be out there while that dust was blowing.
A lot of times he would. Mm-hmm.
Did he have a tractor, or did he use
Yes.
horses?
No, we had a tractor.
Hmm.
We never farmed with horses.
Yes. What did you raise in that part of the country?
Wheat mostly, and then alfalfa,
Hmm.
a little bit of maize,
Hmm.
but wheat for the most part.
And what are you raising now? You're still
Same
living
thing.
on the same
Mhm.
thing.
Yes.
And cattle, you're
Oh
raising
yes, cattle are a big thing now,
Hmm.
more than there were, of course.
Hmm.
We didn't raise that many cattle. Now my father did.
What breed of cattle does your husband raise?
They crossbred now.
Yes, that's
The big thing. We had
Mhm.
Herefords for a while.
mhm.
Well, we have had Angus,
Yes.
but now it's mostly crossbreed.
Hmm.
Hmm. My father always had shorthorn
Yes.
cattle. And my father, to get back to him, was a little bit of an authority on alfalfa. He always raised a lot of alfalfa. And my sister married Frank Chilcott, who was the superintendent out at the field station for a long time. And Frank would kind of consult my father about alfalfa because, he had not lived in this area before he came here.
Yes.
And so, yes, we raised a lot of alfalfa. It's the only time I ever worked in the field. My father didn't approve of women out in the field or milking cows.
Yes.
But I have helped a little bit shock alfalfa
Hmm.
hay,
Hmm.
if you've ever done that.
I've not done that, but I have worked a little in the field, and I always felt so happy out there.
I did too. I enjoyed that. That alfalfa smelled so good.
Yes. And then after that, I'd always watch that field to see how it was growing. I felt like it was my field.
That's right. That's right.
Maybe I didn't work more than a day in it, but it was fun. And how many children do you have?
We have 3.
And what's their names?
Walter, Walter, farms on the place at Sharon where we
Yeah.
live.